How about we start with introduction? So I don't know if we want to go around. If you could maybe say your name, give me a little bit of information. So tell me what your dream job was when you were like 5, 10 years old. One reason for attending the presentation, and what's something that you'd like to get out of the talk in terms of like what you'd like to learn, what you'd like to maybe talk about. So I don't know who's the extrovert in the group that wants to go first.
My name is Nicole Garbo. When I was little, I used to perform for my parents on the rock. Britney Spears to be exact. One reason for attending, I mean, we have to do it for a class, but I think that this is going to be like interesting to see what about it. I think it'd just be
Cool. What class?
what kind of classes.
Awesome.
I'm Lizzie Sharping. When I was like 5, I wanted to be a professional soccer player. I'm also a WellCat, but I changed my majors a lot my freshman year, and so this will be helpful just to help other friends and if they have like career majors too.
Cool.
It's Justin McCartney, and my dream job as a child was to be a Major League Baseball player.
Okay.
I'm also here with the WellCat Ambassadors. But I also just wanted to come and see, like you said, struggling to find a major, questioning whether they're in the right major or not.
Sure. And we'll talk about some of that too. Awesome.
Actually, I wanted to be a vet, and I'm here because I love the nature, but I have a bunch of career options, and I don't know what
Cool. What major are you in?
to do. Engineering.
Okay, cool. Okay. What'd you change from and to?
I was dietetics now, nutrition and health, so no.
I'm Reagan Anderson. I'm here because I need to write essays for K State experience for my science class. My dream job as a child was a zoologist, and my dad told me to make no money, so I was like, okay. And
Cool. What's your essay about?
we just have to write about like we're talking.
Wow. So no pressure, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If it sucks, you can tell me. That's all right. I'll tell you a little bit about me before I launch into it. So my primary job right now is a therapist over counseling services. So I'm employed through the university full time. Finishing up my PhD, I've done all my coursework and internship and doing my dissertation and all that fun stuff. My research is actually in vocational psychology, which is a lot on careers and work and all that fun stuff. So this is stuff that. Hi, come on in. It's stuff that I've actually worked as a career counselor at different points, but I've done a decent amount of research, so I kind of know what's up to date with that. And I actually had a pretty interesting career path myself, and that's why I got into it. So I started off college as a music performance major, switched halfway through to psychology, and graduated on time. So I think I have a lot of compassion for folks that kind of switch around and try to figure it out. So the things that I hope that we can get across, I'd like for us to at least talk a little bit about why it's important to find not just a job, but find meaningful work and work that's meaningful for each individual. I want to talk a little bit about your values and interests and how that plays into kind of choosing a major, choosing a job. And then we are going to talk about kind of resources and where you can go next as part of it. We did introduction, so I don't know if you two would be willing to introduce yourself. So we said name, what you wanted to be in terms of like your job when you were a child, so like 5, 10 years old, and kind of what you're hoping to get out of the talk today. Cool. And what something that you're hoping to either learn or get from the talk today?
We're going to gain some insights about
Thanks. Awesome. So we can try to put some of that bend on it too. It sounds like we got a few different people that are looking at like not just how you can apply it, but how you can use it to help others. So, and this isn't going to get too heavy, but it's good to know that there's a lot of different information out there in terms of meaningful work. So even if you were to kind of do a Google search or to kind of do some of your own research, you'll see this come up in a lot of different ways. And so three of the terms that you'll see it out a lot, work satisfaction, calling, and meaning at work. And so when we talk about work satisfaction, that just means how much you like your job, which can be different from having a meaningful job. So when we're talking to somebody, so for example, when I did career counseling a few years ago, some people would come in and say, I really want to love my job. Some people, it's more important that they find that sense of purpose. They find that kind of drive for their work. Calling, sometimes you'll see it in the literature. It can go either way in terms of kind of secular or religious. So some of the secular calling stuff is pretty much the same thing as meaning in work research, but a lot of the research on calling can take kind of a spiritual religious bend. So if you look into that stuff, that's kind of a place to start. So getting a pop quiz on the voluntary thing. So if you could take a second and answer these 10 questions. So what you want to do is take each of them and give it a score 1 through 5. So 1 being absolutely not like me, like doesn't apply, and 5 being absolutely like me, totally applies. So does anybody need any like paper or anything? Okay. 1. Tell you what. Good. Well, this is actually a pretty well-researched survey of meaningful work, and I think it gives people a really good place to start in figuring out kind of where to go in their career. It's actually free online. It's called the Work and Meaning Inventory, and you can kind of take it if you are kind of looking to help someone else, whether it's in advising or if you've got a friend that's really kind of struggling. It can give you a sense of where somebody's starting in terms of their meaningful work. So what you do is, for each of the numbers there, you add those up for the different kind of subscales. So the first one with positive meaning is what I think you probably typically think of with meaningful work. So what are the feelings the person has in terms of how much they feel like their work's meaningful? The second one, greater good motivations. So that one is more along the lines of how much you feel like your work is kind of helping other people. So you talk about being a nurse growing up, right? So that might be something that would score pretty high in a greater good motivation. And then the last one is meaning making through work. And so what that's kind of asking is, how big of a role in your overall sense of meaning does work play? Because one of the things that we'll talk about is a lot of times when people come in really looking for a meaningful job, usually part of that conversation is how much do you need your overall sense of meaning to be at work versus how much could you do that through hobbies or how much could you do that kind of through your personal life or through friends and family and that kind of different thing. So, and you can also get a total score. So, and we'll post these slides and this talk online. So if you ever wanted access to it, like I said, it's free. You don't have to anything. So, generally speaking, it's important, and we see a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So, I mean, the biggest one is if you're full time in terms of your work. through your adult life, it'll be the number one activity that you'll do above and beyond anything else. So I think it's 10% of your life, and that includes sleep. So that's a lot of time we spend at work. And then the research really supports the importance. And so, like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But research shows there's really strong relationships to people who have and experience meaningful work tend to have better mental health. And so you'll see it kind of have a negative relation with depression, with anxiety, with kind of positive relationship with coping with stress. It has a really strong relationship with subjective well-being, so how well you feel about kind of your own life and how things are going. And then finally, with overall life satisfaction. So kind of the more you feel like your work is meaningful, the happier you tend to be. And it's also good for employers. So I know we don't have any business people in here, but there's also kind of a push to make sure employees are really taken care of, because we see people tend to stay in jobs longer, they tend to like their jobs more, they tend to so organizational citizen behaviors, so they might get more involved in kind of optional things around the office, they might kind of take more kind of time and put it into things that they might not necessarily have to in terms of work. Can you all think of any companies that are big with this? There's a couple that come to mind for me. There's one big one. Google's a huge one. So did anybody see the movie The Internship? And the movie's actually pretty corny. I won't lie, it's like a typical Vince Vaughn, like, hey, I'm tall and awkward, and this is kind of my shtick. But I think it was filmed at Google, and they're pretty well known for kind of having a lot of things set up so people find meaning in the work, and they have people really follow their passion. So what about for you all? Kind of what's the importance for finding like something meaningful, or, I mean, I know some of you have talked about kind of your majors and jobs and things. Do you like it? Do you find it meaningful? Do you not? Yeah.
Yeah,
So what do you want to do long term?
speech pathologist,
Okay. So what's that kind of look like for you, or the importance of like?
just like fixing people, if they go through the problem, and I can help them do their.
So kind of that greater good, like helping piece. Awesome. Majors of their career. How many people like have a major and have a job idea lined up? How many people just have a major? Okay. So part of that's figuring out, like, even if your major is meaningful or not meaningful, kind of what career within that would be. So we can talk about some of that too. So it has a lot of different parts to it. And so what I would say is, if you're trying to look at, okay, I'm in this major, I want to find a job that I find meaningful, or, you know, if you're working with the Wildcat Ambassadors Program, or if you're kind of advising students, there's a lot to break down within the meaning piece. And so we talk about it like it's this one thing, but it actually has a lot of different components to it. And so where I would really kind of encourage people to look at is, what are the different components that you feel like you might need to kind of spend more time looking at? So the first thing with meaning is it tends to be more growth-oriented over pleasure-oriented. And so part of what we talk about within meaningful work is it's something that's supposed to be fulfilling, but it might not necessarily be something that's enjoyable. So I worked with somebody in career counseling for a while that was in grad school to become a dentist eventually. And so to pay his bills, he had to work part-time kind of washing dishes at a restaurant in the college town that I was at, and he hated it. And so a lot of what we talked through is how he could kind of deal with that experience. And one of the things that was really helpful was he ended up finding kind of a sense of meaning within that job, even though he hated it, because for him, once he made the shift of, this really is enabling me to pay for my school, it's helping me kind of do what I ultimately want to do and have that freedom, that was a big shift. So that's kind of an important piece. The second kind of part of this that I think it's good to think about is work centrality. So how much you want work to take up in terms of your overall kind of life and how you feel about things. And so I'll give an example. So if you want to be a physician or you want to be a nurse, right? You're going to have to put in a lot of hours, especially on the front end. Accounting's pretty notorious for this, so especially early on, if you go into accounting, for example, your early jobs will work you a lot. So for some people, meaningful work means in that time that I work, I find it really important. But other people, the work centrality is not as big, and so what they'll do is they'll kind of set up work to only be there maybe the 40 hours a week so they can do all the other things that they like. So working with somebody that may be going into a job that it's not that they have a lot of passion with that, but it kind of frees them up for other stuff. Work role identity, so how much you identify with that. And so, for example, somebody that's a teacher and has always been kind of a helper, always helped people kind of learn, you'll see them kind of take on this big piece. The next two we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in terms of values and interest. This is a really practical place to start, I think. And so that's probably what we'll focus on it. But when you're kind of looking at, I've got this major, I don't know what to do with it, or I'm trying to pick a major, or whatever it kind of is, those are two kind of the backbone of some of this stuff. Engagement, so how much do you really kind of go into work and dig in versus you're kind of trying to pass the time. And task significance, so how important do you feel like what you're doing is? Do all those make sense? Okay. So we won't spend a ton of time talking about this, but I think it's helpful, and I want to ask you all kind of where you're at within this process. So a lot of times when people are, especially college age folks, looking at trying to make choices around their major or job, nothing in life is really that linear, but it's kind of good to have this as a roadmap on where to start. And so usually the first step in trying to figure some of these things out are really trying to understand yourself and doing a lot of like self-assessment and self-reflection. And so we'll talk about the interests and values, but it might be looking at what skills do I have, like what things am I naturally good at, what would I want to build up. It might be looking at experiences. And so for some people, if they had, let's say, a job where they shadowed, let's say maybe they shadowed a dentist and then they hated it, right? Or maybe they just hate going to the dentist. That's going to factor into their career decisions if they were looking into kind of the medical field. The second part's getting practical information. And so for a lot of this, it's getting out like, what's the common salary? Like, what is the future outlook? So what's the job market going to look like in 10 years? What are the requirements? So do I need to go to grad school? Do I need to get special certification? And then the last part is a lot of figuring out if you like it. And so it might be talking to people through kind of informational interviewing. It might be job shadowing. And I think this is important because when people are trying to figure it out on their own, sometimes I'll see people kind of skip ahead to step 2. So they don't know where they're going to start, and they jump into trying to learn everything about kind of all the jobs that are out there. And that can be really overwhelming. So if you have a better sense of kind of what you like and who you are as a person and what some of those values are, it kind of makes the later steps less overwhelming. We also had the point about resources. So it's actually probably going to depend on where I would suggest somebody going. Maybe it's a starting point to kind of get in this process. Like even where to go on campus is going to be really dependent on what phase they're in. So for you all that are kind of not in jobs or looking at jobs, where do you feel like you're at in terms of this? Specifically for some of you folks still kind of figuring out like what you want to do. Would you say you're kind of still trying to figure out the self-assessment, or are you trying to kind of get more information? Mm-hmm. Okay. Good, because there's slides about that. So a lot of where I'll start with somebody is within values. And so if somebody's coming in and they're really not sure where they kind of want to go with their jobs, we'll do some things about getting their history and things like that. But often where the conversation will lead is values. And so this really is something to reflect on in terms of meaningful work, because it's what you care about within your work environment. And a lot of times it's similar to what you care about outside of work, but it's not always the same thing. And so, for example, somebody can really value their friendships and relationships outside of work, but they might not really care about if they get along with their coworkers. Like, that's going to have a different kind of importance for people. So what I want us to do is, so on the third bullet point down there, there's 10 kind of common values, and I think those are some of the, tend to be the ones that people weight higher than others. If you could, go ahead and kind of rank order your 10. And so if you want to write it down, or if you want to kind of do it in your mind. And so salary being how much you're going to make, it's kind of self-explanatory. Helping others, so finding a job where you can help and kind of help other people. Work environment, so what's the vibe around the office? Is it laid back? Is it really high-paced? Location, so physical location, so if you wanted to be close to home, if you wanted to be by the coast, if you wanted to be in a big city. Prestige, so how much do people kind of in the community value what you do? Leadership, so what you do is kind of important. You're able to kind of maybe take control. You can maybe lead meetings. You can maybe have a team that works underneath you. Benefits, so that's kind of like insurance, kind of different HRE kind of things. Advancement opportunities, so you can kind of move up the work ladder within a job. Creativity, so it could be like arts, music kind of creativity, but for some people it might even be creativity within ideas. So maybe it's, you can think of different kind of projects to do, or maybe you can come up with a different way to do something in the office that they haven't tried yet. And then flexibility, so can you kind of come and go as you please? Could you maybe leave early? Could you set your own schedule? Those kind of things. So, and kind of looking at that, what would everybody say their top 3 is? Okay, is that like 1? Is that in top 3?
It's like 1 or 2.
Okay, what are your other ones? Okay. Okay. Do you have a sense, do those 3 feel like pretty equal? Does one feel stronger than the other? Yeah. Okay.
I did salary, location, and benefits.
Okay. So then, same kind of thing. Are they all 3 kind of clumped together? Okay. What about you for you folks?
And helping others is 1, and then salary.
Okay. Cool.
Salary and creativity.
Okay.
Helping others, salary, and probably flexibility.
Cool.
Environment, salary, location.
Awesome. And part of the reason when I've taught before, there's actually kind of a thing where you can do where you have people kind of auction these things off. And part of the reason why it's good to not just think about what's important to you, but even to actually think about like going through these and rank ordering them is almost with any job you're going to look at, there's kind of this piece of you're going to be able to have some but not others. So I'll give you an example. There's a point in time where I thought about maybe teaching at the college level. The problem being with that is location kind of was important for me for a while. So if you teach at the college level, your options on where you're going to work are very limited and you have very little flexibility on that, right? And so location's important to me, but like some of these I can still have, like helping others I've got in doing therapy and teaching, right? And so that's kind of both there, but location wasn't. So if you can get a sense of what's most important to you, then that's going to really help you kind of figure out where you want to go from there. So interests are another big one. And so this really comes down to what do you like to do? What are you curious about? What classes do you like? And so it's kind of looking at how your job or your major or how your work environment fits you. And so for a lot of you that have said you've got majors, you've got jobs lined up, and even that simple question of do you like your major, a lot of that comes down to interest, right? And so, especially if you're working with kind of freshmen or people that are really new to starting to figure some of this out, you might be starting with interest because that's what they're trying to figure out, like what classes do I like? And that doesn't always mean that you want to have a job in that field, right? Like, but it can give us a lot of information because typically the more interested you're in something, the more you like it. And it's bigger than just work interest, so it's not just classes, but it could be hobbies, so what you like to do in your free time. We can get a lot of information on interest through like what TV shows you watch, what movies you like, if you kind of follow sports, those different kind of things. So, all right. So imagine you're going out this weekend and you go to a house party and you're one of the first 7 people there, okay? You don't really know anybody. Somebody from your class invited you. And these 6 people here are the first ones here. And so you've got Andrew, who's an agriculture major. He likes to spend time outdoors. He likes doing woodwork and metalwork. Julius is a chemistry major. He likes puzzles, solving problems. Allison's a creative writing major. She likes playing the guitar. Marcus is a social work major. He volunteers at the food pantry on the weekends. Ellen's a marketing major, and she started a small independent social network site for college students. James is an accounting major, and he enjoys helping his friends organize their dorm rooms and apartments. So if you imagine these 6 people are here, that's all you know about them, who are you going to gravitate towards? Okay, why Marcus for you?
Just because he does a lot of volunteer work. And stuff.
Okay, who would your kind of second choice be? So you talk with Marcus for like 15, 20 minutes, go mingle.
Probably Allison, just because she sounds interesting.
Okay, cool. Marcus and Allison. What about other folks? Okay. Why Andrew?
Just because.
Okay, so you get some common interest. Okay. Yeah.
Either Julius or James.
Okay. Any reason why?
James, he has my major, and Julius, I like problem solving.
Okay. So what we can kind of figure out here, and there's different like big formal tests that you can do, but really what that comes down to is a question of interest. So one of the big kind of career things within the research is it's called the Holland type. You can actually get an assessment at the Counseling Center that's got all this, and you pay money, and it's like got 10 pages with the printouts. But this is a real quick and dirty kind of way to get some of that information. So the idea is that interests fall into 6 main different kind of people and kind of work environments. So conventional are people and work environments that have a lot of organization. So it might be an office manager, might be somebody that kind of comes in and helps businesses or homes kind of organize things. Realistic tend to be your hands-on people, so they might work outdoors, they might work in kind of more mechanical fields. Investigative folks tend to be your kind of bookish people. They tend to be really sciencey, so they might do a lot of experiments, like that kind of stuff. Artistic people is pretty self-explanatory, but it could be like music, art, but it could also be writing. It's creative pretty broadly. Social tend to be your helpers, so your nurses, your teachers, your therapist, and then enterprising your business folks, so people that want to start up their own company and things like that. So going back to the previous slide, really what you're doing when you're deciding who you want to talk to at the party is figuring out kind of what your top interest area would be. And what we'll tell people within this oftentimes is, what do you think your top 3 would be? And so if you can think about that within those kind of definitions, we'll kind of come back to where you can use that in a little bit. But there's a pretty cool website that we'll talk about at the end that you can plug in your top 3 interest areas, and it'll give you all the careers that fit that. But I think it's also good to think about, so you said I'm kind of between 2 people, right? Like, so some people might have really strong interests that are kind of tied in a couple areas, and some people have like one thing that they're really interested in, or maybe they have 3 things that they're really interested in. And so if you can keep that in mind about what your top areas would be, that's good, because you can actually plug it into that website. And if you have 1, you can put in the combination of 2, you can put in 3, that kind of thing. But that's a pretty good place to start in terms of the self-assessment. And the website that I'll show you is pretty awesome in terms of if you're totally feeling lost on where to start. There's also kind of cultural pieces to being in work, and so a lot of times somebody says they want a meaningful job, that's going to mean different things to people, and so kind of socioeconomic status plays into it. And so, for example, if your family comes from a lower kind of socioeconomic background, that idea of meaningful work might not be something that you're able to pursue. And so for a lot of folks, they come in and maybe salary is one of their top values because it's not realistic for them based on, maybe their parents are paying for them to come to college, or maybe they're taking out a lot of loans, and so it's really important for them to find something practical. That also plays into family messages. So sometimes people come in, maybe there's an expectation. So I worked in a really probably more rural area than this in my last job, and a lot of people will come in and say, like, I can study here and that's great, but really the expectation is I'm going to take over, my parents' farm or the business and those kind of things. And so it's good to keep that in mind. What I always ask people is who are their role models, and so even if you've got a job in a major lined up, I think it's always good to find people in the field that you want to work in. For one reason, you can get a sense of if you like it or not. So sometimes it's really interesting and it really fits your values, but the actual job itself is something that you don't want to do. And so I think, I go back to the dentistry, but I think that's a perfect example. Like, maybe you like the idea of learning about that, and maybe the science behind it's really exciting, but if you don't want to spend all day kind of digging in people's mouths, like, you're probably not going to like it, right? And so getting a sense of what the job's actually like. And then last is self-efficacy. So trying to figure out how well you feel like you'll do at a certain task. And so it's kind of different than confidence because it's task specific. So somebody can have a lot of overall confidence, but they might have low self-efficacy in math, for example. So that might be something they have to build up kind of based on their background. And so I think that kind of really comes into the knowing yourself piece. So kind of looking at some practical tips. The first being, looking at your kind of course planning. So are people upperclassmen, lowerclassmen, freshmen, sophomore, freshmen? Oh, wow. So you all really kind of in this. And so I think it's always important to think about, especially with elective classes, like when you're registering for classes, think about why you want to take something. So especially if you know what job you want to do, then I think you've got some more questions to answer. So if you're still trying to figure out like what I want to do, what I'm interested in, then it might just be, all right, maybe the reason for me taking this is to explore my interest, to see if I like it, see if it's something that I want to do. But if you know what you want to do, then there becomes a question of what skills am I going to get from this class? And so a lot of times people do this with minors. And so if you're a business major, you might minor in another language, or you might minor like in accounting or something like that. So you're developing skills that are going to help you be kind of more marketable. Or you're just taking it because it's a requirement. And so that's a very practical reason to take something, right? Like you'll have a lot of those. In terms of though, like looking at your career, so more than just a major in your classes, it's good to look at some of that plan too. So what are the educational requirements? So when I did a lot of career counseling, I had a ton of people that would say, I want to go in and I want to be a doctoral level therapist. And then they wouldn't realize, one, that they'd need to kind of go on for however many years of school. They wouldn't understand how long that would take. They didn't understand like what GPA they might need. And so it's good to start getting some of that information out the best you can. I think that's where if you can have kind of good mentors and role models and advisors, that can really help. What skills do you need to develop again? And then what experience or exposure do you need to get? So if you really are certain that you want to do speech pathology, then it's a matter of going and maybe talking to some people that do it, see if they like their job, what do they wish they would have known when they were looking, or what kind of things might be helpful in kind of beefing up your resume or beefing up your grad school applications. And then the last piece is how can you add meaning to what you're already doing? And so for some of you, it might be a matter of you have to take, a certain job right out of college that isn't kind of your best fit. And so how can you bring your values into your job? And so some of that's out of your control, like salary. If we got to set our own salary, that'd be great. But like you talked about flexibility being a big one. So part of it might be how can I kind of add that into what I'm already doing? And so it might be kind of asking your boss for kind of a project that you can work on your own, even if there's set schedules or things like that. And then the last one's kind of what are your priorities at work? And so this gets back to the values piece about what's the stuff that you can give up and what's the stuff that you can't. And so if salary is the most important, then maybe interest and values aren't as big on your decision-making process. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about resources, and then I want to open it up for like if people have specific questions to them or things they want to know. So on campus, there's a few different places, and I think it's kind of good to know what each office does. And so Counseling Services, where I'm at, is a lot of the exploration. And so if it's you kind of need to talk through like, I'm interested in all these things. I need to figure out how they connect. I need to learn more about myself. If you want kind of formal career counseling, then you might want to kind of look at us. We also have the career assessments, like I talked about. One of them is the strong interest inventory, and so that will give you really detailed information in terms of your interest if you wanted some more of that. We've also got some in terms of personality, so that can impact things sometimes. ACIC is really, really good if you're looking for information about classes and majors. And so if you want to know, like, what are the different majors on campus, or I kind of like these classes, but I'm not really sure what kind of major would fit that, they can be really good with getting you set up in that way. And CES, I think, is probably where you want to look, maybe even more kind of in your junior and senior year when you're getting ready to go out into the job market. And so when you're getting your resume together, if you want to do like mock interviews and things like that. I do know that ACIC and CES are going to be combining like in the next few months, years, whatever their transition process is. So at some point, that's just good to have on your radar since you all are probably going to be on campus for a few more years. But that's when someone comes in and they don't know where to go, that's kind of usually how I make a decision on where to direct them. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actually is a really good website if you want to get more of that practical information about a job. And so for some of you that know what you want to do, or for some of you that have maybe a major and want to get more details in terms of the specific jobs, that's a really good place to start. But the one I'm going to actually pull up on here is ONET. Has any of you seen ONET before? Cool. And you can't say you won't learn anything new today. So if you just Google ONET, like the letter O, the word net, it's the first one that comes up. And this is like the one website that I'll pretty much show anybody that comes in careers and stuff because there's so much out there. So you can do a few different things. So if you go to advanced search, you can search by interest. And so that's when we talked about the different interest types. You can actually put it in based on here. Or I think you can, yeah, so if you click on one of these, like let's say your top one was realistic and your second one was investigative, you can put those both in and it'll give you all the jobs that kind of combine those. And so especially if you have a couple interest areas, that can be really helpful. I'll tell you what, who wants to give me a job they've been thinking about or looking at? You're trying to figure out jobs. What are some that you've looked at? Yeah. Okay. I can't spell, so we're going to autocorrect this. Actually, is it going to let me type? Oh, yeah, there you go. Awesome. So So if you want to look at like dietitians and nutritionists, actually show you real quick, the ones with the sun on them up there, those are kind of tied to Bright Outlook. So the idea behind those jobs are they're supposed to kind of look good in terms of openings in the next like 5, 10, 15 years. And this is actually linked in with the Department of Labor's like work statistics. So they're not just pulling the stats out of nowhere. But if you pull this up, it'll tell you like the different tasks that you have to do. It'll talk about the different technologies. So what are the different kind of skills you might need to learn. And so this can play into like what kind of classes that you might want to take. Knowledge, again, this can be really helpful if you're looking at electives within a specific field. Same thing with skills. Abilities is kind of general. I don't think that's the most helpful thing on there, but that's there. Work activities, so what's your day in, day out look like for these two. All right, so if you go to Job Zone, it'll tell you what typically people need in terms of education. And so if you're thinking about a job, this one's kind of interesting. For a lot of jobs, you need kind of one type of degree. So you either need maybe just a bachelor's, or maybe you need to get a master's, or whatever it is. This one's actually pretty split. And so that means that you may or may not have to go and go to grad school, which is helpful. The interests are all there that we talked about. Values are there that we talked about. It'll give you related occupations. So this is also helpful. Bless you. If you have a few things in mind but want to know some more options, this is really good. Since everybody here mentioned salary, the wages and employment trends are on here. So if you actually go to, so you can see that the average person that's a dietitian or nutritionist makes $56,000 a year. And then if you pull this up, you want to stay in Kansas or you want to go somewhere else? Okay, so we're staying in Kansas. You can actually do it by state, and this is pretty cool. It will compare your state to the national average. So in Kansas, the average for kind of your medium folks is 54,000. People on the high end are making 73. So it actually gives you a pretty good breakdown of that stuff. So what I tell people is if you want to know what kind of your options are with jobs, this is an awesome place to start. So that's kind of the big one. So people have like questions or things that we didn't talk about that you're hoping we talk about? ACIC? I think they're in the building of Holton Hall right now. Yeah, and so if you type it, I mean, they've got a long name. It's like academic. Yeah, I don't even know what the acronym stands for. But if you just type in ACIC K-State into Google, it'll pull it up. They're pretty big, so you wouldn't have to like wait too long for kind of an appointment or things. I think you could even walk in a lot of times. Yeah. Question? Else? Cool. Well, if people aren't like big group question askers, I'll stick around for as long as people are kind of here. I've got some handouts. This one's on our career stuff that we do at the counseling services. I've got a handout for Pet Away Stress. So if you want to play with puppies, we've got that. And then I've got one for the rest of the cat chat. So if you want those, feel free, but thanks for coming, and I'll stick around for a little bit.